Cosmic here, welcome to the channel and happy Code Geass launch week. Now, if you are a new player just looking for a place to start, or a veteran who really is excited for the rare battles and just wants an extra deck to play locally, this is the video for you. We're going to be covering the 5 different Code Geass decks that you need to know to get ready or just dive right in. So the one thing I will say that this is one of the strongest sets that Union Arena has launched, so it's really just a great set to buy in general, but it's also really fun and gets another big boost with Volume 2. So if you're either a fan of the series or just looking for a second or maybe third deck to play on the cheap, this is definitely a set to dive in with. Now, that said, I do want to talk about some changes that came to the set, as well as a couple of the cards that I'm looking forward to the most. But with that out of the way, let's dive right in. So yes, up front, we do need to talk about the card that was removed. So not only is also the first card to get restricted in Japan, but is now just completely absent from the English version, and honestly good. This is a card, or at least a deck overall, that if you didn't follow the Japan meta, it was a nightmare for running over events, and truly created the first tier 0 deck that we saw just from overall performance. Now, part of that was a little bit due to players not being as familiar with how to play it out, but in general, it was a very straightforward and strong aggro deck that really made it easy to close out a couple key turns that made it difficult for your opponent to stay in the game and really felt like they didn't have a lot of agency in it. So for that reason, it is still restricted to 1 in Japan, and it is going to be removed from the English version. So I would not expect this card to even be included in Volume 2, if I'm being honest, unlike the changes to Bleach, which we are seeing them get re-added in Volume 2. So as you see other lists from Japan to English, you'll notice that this card is not included, and that is the reason why. Moving on from there, just another part that I wanted to talk about, and just kind of at a high level before we get into the list themselves. What am I excited about in terms of for this set overall? Now, if you know me, I just love my gimmicky fun decks that have a really cool payoff. Obviously, I was a huge fan of Blue Bomber in Hunter x Hunter, and those decks just always tend to resonate with me. So even if, and I apologize, that Code Geass has been on my back burner list for a very long time, and I still haven't had a chance to watch it, I am still very excited for some of the mechanics that are getting introduced in this set with C2 and the pizza deck. And again, I mean, just name alone, and I'm sure as many people have told me, or just as we see in the series itself, there is just a story behind that, but it's just so fun to get to say that I'm playing the pizza deck, and players will be like, what do you mean? And then you get to have a little bit of a story with it. But this really is a card that has a late game payoff, assuming that you can kind of meet the criteria. So again, I always really do love those gimmicky late combo style of decks. And then the other one is just Lancelot. This design is sick, right? Again, as someone who hasn't seen the series yet, I just absolutely love the design of this card, and also the alt arts that we're going to see later. But it's also in green, which is just one of the colors I like anyways in Union Arena for just a play style and this late game bombs threats you get to play. And Lancelot really does fill that criteria, which we're going to talk a little bit more later when we talk about the deck itself. But this card is a absolute monster to face across the table. For those that have the callback to Hisoka in Green Hunter x Hunter, this is Hisoka just kind of turned up to 11 and just way more strong in every single way, even if it does come with the downside of requiring a little bit more energy. But with that out of the way, let's get into the decks themselves. Now, starting off with a little bit weaker, but something I still want to mention up front, is the 4 Holy Swords Affinity. And this is something that I honestly, again, forgot about in Volume 1, because the better support that it gets and a couple more of the raid targets that it really missed out on is actually in Volume 2. So this is a deck that you can technically build in Volume 1, and I'll talk about a second deck, at least at a high level later, that kind of fit this criteria as well. But I felt that this one was complete enough that if people were fans of the series, they are probably looking forward to playing something of this style, so I wanted to include it. Now, that said, it is a much more lower to the ground aggressive purple deck, but one of the key things that you'll note here, instead of having Renji Rush or similar decks that just have a bunch of 4K bodies, in this case, you do want to either play the raid target or have the trailer sight card to then boost your guys up to 4K from that 3,500 threshold. So yes, you do get to shave off an energy and maybe play a half a turn faster compared to some of the Rookie Rush variants, as people are calling it, or just Renji Rush, or 4K Rush, whatever the official Union Arena name is that we give it. But this one does have a stipulation that you do need to see the site or the main raid target itself. So That is why this is one of the few times that we're going to see the sight cards being added as a 4 of. Code Geass was one of the first sets, at least early in Japan, that made you want to play a 4 of in a lot of the cases just because of how strong they were. And so trailer, I think here ultimately could be a 2, but I think for people who are trying this deck for the first time are really going to want that consistency and make sure that you see the trailer sight just so you know how the deck is meant to be played out. Again, the main purpose of these videos is really to just introduce the overall archetypes and talk about at the high level and give you starter lists to really dive in with. Of course, further refinement and changes are more than welcome to see with these lists. These are by no means meant to be the final versions of all of these, but at least a good starting point. Again, for those who are hopefully new and joining us for Union Arena, can feel confident to dive right in. So again, as I mentioned at the front, this is one that's going to be a little bit, heavier requirement for seeing either your raid or your trailer to really get the full power of this deck itself. But when it comes online, it can be pretty fast and aggressive. And I think with the new cards that we're getting in Volume 2, does actually pick this up a little bit. Admittedly, it's probably like high tier 3, low tier 2 category compared to like the other purple deck that we're going to talk about that's just way better. But it's still another play style that when we look at the Union Arena sets overall, like the power level Code Geass is just a much higher overall. Again, I really want to stress that compared to other sets where typically we've seen with like JJK, it's really around blue, either the Sukuna build or the Nanami, but I really feel pretty confident saying that like every single deck that you can build out of this set that are the more complete versions are something that's going to go win some events. So that is a very quick look at the 4 Holy Swords. Again, something that's going to be a bit more aggressive focus and really cutting down to the low end with these 3 energy raids that you really want to be playing if you can to get the raid effect, but also because they are so flexible in terms of what the raid off of, or just being able to play them early for a body, then pump to 4K. It gives you a little bit more versatility in how you want to pilot the deck. So that's what I like about this one, is them being a little bit cheaper does give you more options and how you want to approach it, but something I think that we'll kind of take a bit of a sideline until Volume 2. Now, the deck that I know a lot more people are excited about, of course, just for obviously the theming and the characters involved, but also a lot better, is going to be the Lelouch and Callan deck. And obviously C2 is in here as well because of the either raid requirements or other parts that she does with extra drawing. But ultimately, this is going to be more of your typical purple raid style of deck where you're getting some sort of value for it. And then also you can use the Guren MK2, which is going to act as a nice must block and impact combo when you streamline it together. So it does give you a little bit of extra removal, which as we've seen in Union Arena so far is pretty much a staple of what makes a tier 1 deck, making sure that you have your 4 special cards, and then also something else that is either a really good defensive raid, which we'll talk about more in a second, or just extra avenues of removal so you can really target your opponent's board. And getting back to the defensive raids, I really got to give a shout out here to Gawain with the when played, all characters on your opponent's front line lose 1k BP until end of turn. If you hit this on the first attack, you are going to be feeling pretty bad because you will likely have a wall of 4Ks at that point, shrink your entire opponent's board to 3Ks, and you say, okay, I took the 1 damage, and now I'm going to swing back. What's also interesting about this card is that it cannot be blocked by a character with 2k or less BP, so it does force your opponent to also block with high value cards or something that requires more energy, more action points to set up. So Gawain in this case can be really good that you will have turns that you set up like a double raid, shrink everything by 2k, and then just have unblockable damage. So this deck really lends itself well to giving you a few different paths to victory in terms of how you want to approach it, while also just being purple. So you say, hey, I get extra card draw effects because why not? And then, of course, the color trigger itself being just a very good and powerful effect that lets you draw extra cards, or again, just giving you an extra body to block with sometimes is kind of all you need, or also finds us a raid target. So this is definitely a deck with the color trigger that gets even more value than what we might have seen in other decks just because of all the different utility that you get out of it. So if you want a more mid-game raid style focused purple deck, then definitely look no further than kind of, again, the staple that we're going to see time and time again with the purple Gawain, Callan, and C2 deck. Moving on from there, my favorite is Lancelot. This is the pivotal late game big body. We are closing out, doing big damage, boys, and I am so excited to finally have this in English because as we saw with Kurapika, it is a 5k body. Obviously, the defensive rate is still good because you can rest something down, but then after the turn that you play it, Kurapika definitely does feel like it falls off, other than having impact, which is obviously still good to close out the game, and a 5k body, which gives you nice defense. Lancelot then says, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to remove something, and then I'm going to remove something again because you're not going to take damage too. And oh, and by the way, you're still taking another point of damage. Oh, you have another turn? Well, I hope you drew a removal for Lancelot, because if not, this guy is ending the game lightning fast. And on top of that, as I just mentioned with the purple raids, this card is a bomb if you hit it out of life. It comes into play, you get to remove something immediately, then it's a 5k blocker. I mean, this is going to completely shut down your opponent's turn, assuming you have any other type of board support with it. And then again, the crackback is going to be very strong because they are immediately going to lose another character. So the downside of this deck, of course, with green in general, is that the consistency can be a bit lacking because we don't have as much draw or filtering as we do see in purple and blue. But again, the tools that you have in this deck are really nice to make sure that you're always going to have your raids either coming out of life, or what I really like about this one in particular too is the 6 Lancelot that allows you to get the card back from underneath it, meaning you're always going to have that raid father. Now, yes, you do have to replay it, so that is still going to take an action point, but again, if we're using like the color trigger Suzaku to draw a card and still getting that double energy, that lines up very well. Now, again, I do want to stress one more time that the 8 energy is quite rough to build up to because it does take your entire back line. However, we do have really good double energy cards that we want to play in general. Jeremiah gives us the double block, which can be really important against, surviving against these very low to the ground aggressive strategies. I do wish it was a 3,500 just for a card, type that we're going to talk about later, but it's still very good. And then also the 4 Suzaku also has steps, so it allows you to put up these early blockers while still protecting your energy line. Now, yes, one of the ways to counter this is to arguably, if you have a good lead, is yes, use your removal early to knock out these step characters because it does require such a heavy energy investment that removing a step character or 2 can win you the game on the spot sometimes because they cannot get to that 8 energy that they really need. Other than that, of course, it does have your typical removal for 5k bodies. So this is, again, one of those cases where do we have access to 8 removal? Yes, it's automatically a high tier 2, if not tier 1 deck, as long as, the requirements aren't something that's like, 6 characters or something ridiculous, right? In both of these cases, these conditions are relatively easy to meet, all things considered. And with Lancelot, there is a great opportunity to also play a couple different versions of this deck. And that's kind of the last part I want to comment, at least for the green side of Code Geass in this set, is that Lancelot himself has kind of 2 different builds. I try to pick the one that's just like much more streamlined and I think much more like new player focused because it's very, here's a step mechanic, here's a double energy, raid in a big Lancelot, and you just win, right? That's hopefully what it would streamline into. There are some of like the triple energy cards you can rely on and some other card variations you can do that, you can play around with the build and have a little bit of fun. Now, the other deck that I didn't want to really give a full dedicated spot to here in the video, but I'll mention very quickly here at the end, is there is this like green rush style of deck with a few interesting event cards or early units that, much like purple, you could have a dedicated, lower to the ground aggressive strategy, but in green, there's not really enough cards to make this work or it doesn't get support in volume 2. But if you are wanting to play something more like the Oklahoma Rush, as it's been coined from Eggman's event, definitely make sure to check out the Toshiro green list that was mostly focused on, again, 0s and 1s and 2s to really be aggressive early on, and then using Toshiro at the top end just to lock out a key blocker and swing for game. You could kind of replicate that in green Code Geass, but ultimately I think between the two of them, it's a night and day difference, and I think the Bleach version is way better, but again, something that was worth just a quick shout out here during that section. Now, yes, I gotta make the joke, but yes, it is the Ashford Academy that gets the spotlight on this deck, and this was the tier 0 red aggro nonsense. And again, this is one of the few times that we really do get to see sight cards kind of taking the spotlight, because in this case, it just gives you haste for something that you play. This entire deck strategy is rushing down the field and getting multi-attacks with the 4 Suzaku to restand stuff, or the Academy to surprise your opponent with some quick damage, because it does come into play active and gives you that extra swing. So this is a deck that's really going to surprise your opponent and, you know, get damage out of nowhere a lot of times if they're not ready or don't know how to play against this style of deck. And then on top of that, we still do have things like the 3 Nunnally, which gives us impact, so we are still able to close out games and find other ways to push damage. And then the one thing I will note for this one in particular, there are no final triggers in this deck. That is correct. That is intended, because this is just I want to go empty out my hand, and there's not going to be an opportunity realistically for you to use the final to extend out your turn, where it's just going to be looking for bodies and making sure you're finding as many 3Ks to increase that consistency to get that early pressure. Now, this might be something that you want to, you know, play a few options and maybe cut down to, you know, a couple of cards and then put in 2 finals just for the one-off that you find it and maybe help extend some turns. But ultimately, this is a deck that just wants to empty its hand as soon as possible, take the AP for the extra draw, and then just play 2 cards a turn every single turn after that to try to find like the Nunnally to close out the game, or the special as well. So if you are looking for the first red deck, right, or just a super aggressive strategy, then this is the deck for you. Now, the other thing I'll note here, because it hasn't come up obviously yet, because it's our first introduction of red, as well as the red color trigger. Yeah, the red color trigger feels pretty bad. Let's just get that elephant out of the room, you know, acknowledge really quickly. But I definitely think that was one of the balancing things where it only hits 2,500 or less. So it's one of those things that, like, if you hit it really early, then yes, red feels really good. You know, you're forcing your opponent to promote stuff early to get blockers out. Yeah, that can be fine, but a lot of times this color trigger is just going to come in a really awkward time and not do a lot for you. But we'll have to see kind of where the format evolves, because if we see more of the aggressive styles kind of come up in the North American meta, then I think because of how the format has evolved, red color triggers in particular might actually be crazy strong, you know, by comparison. So I'm very curious to see in Orlando what people take to the big events, because I do think that's going to be an opportunity for the red color trigger to kind of get a spotlight it hasn't really had in the JP format. So definitely something to keep an eye on. And then last but not least, before we get into our tier list, is the pizza deck. This is a straight, I want to combo, try to get all of our event cards into the trash to pay off this big CC. And again, get to use those beautiful winter cards. That's probably half the reason to try to build this deck, and close out the game with an amazing, amazing artwork. Now, that said, I do have to add the immediate disclaimer that we talk a lot about filtering in purple and blue, and this deck does have a lot of filtering, to be fair. But it does not have the same top-end capability that we also see supporting those purple and blue decks. So you are quite a bit limited in terms of what you're doing, right? So the CC that's often going to be closing you the game is going to be a get trigger. The Suzaku that you're using, it's just going to come into play and be a body. It's not really doing anything on the defensive side of it. And on top of that, we are really lacking on the 4K bodies to push the damage. So it really comes down to finding the CC, making sure that you're getting 6 or more pizza cards into your sideline, which again, for anyone that's been playing Sukuna's Fingers and you know how difficult it can be to get 4, now imagine you have to get 6 to really make this card what you want it to be, right? It is going to feel a little bit rough to get there, but when you make it all come together and when you're getting to get that double attack impacting CC, oh, it feels just so great. So if you are someone who's looking for more of a combo and hopefully more fun, you know, style of deck, then this is absolutely going to be the one for you. And it does get a couple upgrades in Volume 2. I do want to stress that, but it is a little bit lacking still, unfortunately, as we look to Volume 2 in terms of getting upgrades. So this is, again, one that if you just really like C2, feel free to, you know, put it together, have some fun with it, but does fall a little bit short. And that brings us to our Code Geass format tier list prediction. Now, again, the thing that I really want to stress here is just how insanely strong this set is with the defensive triggers and kind of the key stars that we get to see. If you're playing green or purple, you're going to have some amazing mid to late game style bombs that you can play that match up really well to the current format. Or if you just want to be low to the ground, be aggressive, and end the games as fast as possible, then you have the red version as well. The thing I will note here, and kind of going forward, as I talked about in my last video where we talked about every single JJK deck, I am going to try to clean up this tier list, and the new version of this tier list is what placement do each of these decks and titles have per title per color, right? So the Sukuna here just represents blue JJK overall. The purple bleach just represents purple bleach overall. And again, this is the best deck of each one of these categories. And then of course, for Code Geass, I did break it down. So green and purple, all versions that are the best versions of them. Definitely Tier 1, something I expect to do very well in Orlando. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. They're all getting buffed in Volume 2 as well. We're also getting 3 more decks in Volume 2 that aren't as good, but are still pretty highly rated. I think at worst, they're like Tier 2 is probably where they would line for us, depending on what else we get around then. And then the one I wasn't really unsure about is the red aggressive deck. It's either going to be like low end of Tier 1 or high end of Tier 2. And this is like the one time where I probably should have included a Tier 1.5. I still think it's a very good deck. I still think it's a deck that's going to surprise a lot of people if you don't know how to play into it. So definitely keep that in mind. This is one to look out for. And then, of course, the other 2 down here was the 4 Holy Swords. Unfortunately, just because it is missing a couple key cards from Volume 2, I think it is a little bit lower. Again, having those 3,500 bodies can be a little bit of a restriction. Maybe it's probably between these 2. And then with the Pizza deck for C2, yes, unfortunately, I gotta have to put it bottom of the barrel here just for all the weaknesses I previously mentioned, even if it is a super fun deck. And again, one of my favorite decks to play in this set just because of the payoff nature that it provides. It does feel a little bit frustrating because you have to put so much effort into it for just a single card to hopefully try to close out the game, where 6 Sukuna, again, by comparison, is able to often in that same scenario bounce your entire opponent's board or kill the last one. So there is a little bit of a power disparity between 6 Sukuna and the Pizza C2. But again, I think the rest of Code Geass more than makes up for it. So we did not need to have another Tier 1 deck in this set. It was definitely powerful enough, but something to at least keep in mind. So if you are a new player joining us for Union Arena, definitely let me know in the comments below. And if you're also a veteran, let me know which is your favorite of the Code Geass decks. Definitely comment down below. And with that, I will be having another case opening. Whew, there's so much product to be opened, as well as some boxes, recaps, and all that stuff kind of later on in the week when I have time to record them and get them uploaded. But of course, the rare battles are going on this month. And well, our Code Geass rare battle is Friday, so I need to quickly open my product and build a deck from that. So if the video is delayed, I do apologize, but there is a lot more to cover kind of leading up to Orlando. So hopefully a lot more gameplay content to look forward to in the future. But until the next video, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.